Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome back to the Digital Publishing Summit 2023. We are delighted to have you joining us for this session on the European Accessibility Act implementation. My name is Gauthier. I am the project manager for EDRLab, and I'll be your host for this session. Today, we have the privilege of hearing from experts in the fields, Cristina Mussinelli, Secretary General of the Fondazione LIA, along with Raphaël Berger, Creative Director of Arcom, and Clara Bedom, Project Manager of Arcom. They will provide us with an overview of the current state of the art regarding the implementation of the European Accessibility Act and how the European publishing industry is preparing to comply. Before we begin, I'd like to thank once again our sponsors, Iridium, Glassbox, Audioboost, and The Mark for their support. We would also like to extend our appreciation to Fondazione LIA, who helped us to organize the event accessibility session in the framework of Aldus Up, the European Book Fairs Network. As you know, we encourage you to actively participate to the session by using the Q&A tool available in the webinar. Towards the end of the session, our panelists will take the time to address your question. We value your engagement and insights, so please don't hesitate to interact with us. Before we proceed, you should also note that this session is being recorded, allowing you to refer back to it later on. As part of our community, EDRLab members will also receive written synthesis of each session. Thank you once again for joining us. Enjoy the session. Cristina, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Let's share the screen and see if it works. Can you see it?
Works.
Okay. So thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. We just came from another event that was an accessibility camp, and I think the accessibility topic is becoming more and more relevant in the publishing industry. Just a few words about the foundation. The foundation is a strange animal. It's a no-profit organization created by the Italian Publishers Association in collaboration with the Italian Blind Union. And we also have on board other organizations like the Italian Dyslexia Association and one specialist organization that is the Italian Library for Blind of Monza, and also 76 publishing imprint and the most important Italian library loan service. The goal of the foundation is to raise awareness and to help the actor in the value chain to create what we call the accessible publishing ecosystem. Why we do this? Because there are many reasons, from social responsibility to quality, and also because there is a new legislation that is very important for the publishing industry, that is the European Accessibility Act. Just a few information of the European Accessibility Act. The European Accessibility Act is a European directive that is require accessibility for a lot of category of product and service. And for the publishing industry, it applies to ebook that are considered a service, the metadata that describe the accessibility information about the ebooks, e-commerce website, that means all the platform and website that sell not only digital book, but any kind of publication, dedicated reading software, and e-reading devices. That means that all the elements of the value chain should be accessible to offer the end user the possibility to be able to buy, choose what they want to read without any help in an autonomous way. What is really important from the directive is that as it is a European directive and is made for the European citizen, that also all the other actors that want to sell in Europe should be compliant with this directive. So it doesn't include only European organizations, but every organization worldwide who want to sell product and services in Europe should comply with the requirement. The timeline, the European Accessibility Act was approved by the Commission in 2019. It should be approved in every national legislation by June 2022. It will enter in force in June 2025. At the moment, not all the European countries have already implemented the legislation in their own country. And I think it will be very important to do it very soon. And also we will see afterward, any country may implement the legislation with some national elements that are very important to know and to understand how they will be done. We will have the explanation of the French implementation after my presentation. And by June 2030, there will be a first report by the Commission to monitor the implementation of the Act. A lot of organizations in the publishing value chain in Europe, but not only in Europe, are already working on this topic, adapting their workflow, adapting the production of their publication. The European Accessibility Act has some very important elements that they foresee mandatory compliance with defined standard and technical specification. We will see this a little later. That means that product and service should be compliant with some detailed requirement. There is the requirement for CE marking for products that in our case, in the publishing industry, are only e-reading devices, and the possibility to certify conformity. We, for example, at Fondazione LIA, we offer a service of quality insurance to the publisher that allow them to be sure that they comply with the specification. And also there is, it's mandatory, the presence of European and national enforcement authorities that will be the one who will survey the implementation of the Act, and both for the product and the services. For example, in Italy, there are two different organizations. One is the Ministry of Development for the product, and the organization managing the digital agency for the services. There are some very important annexes in the directive. One is the high-level requirement and functional performance criteria, both for product and services. There are also some more detailed high-level requirements for the ebooks that I think it would be very important to look at. There are some examples. There are rules to check the conformity of the product. There are information of the service meeting accessibility requirements. And there is also one annex that is how to evaluate the possible disproportionate burden in terms of cost and advantage for the people with disability related with the Accessibility Act. Ebooks are considered as a service. That means that not only publishers are involved in the implementation of the legislation, but all the distributor, online retailers, e-commerce website, and also mobile apps should be compliant with the legislation. Software and e-reading solution, it's very, very important. And also DRM, because digital rights management should not impede to the end user to access to the content. Right now, there are some DRM that are not fully accessible, and there are other, like the one produced by the EDRLab, that is LCP, that is fully accessible. So this is another important element along the value chain. And the metadata. It's important to provide the end user detailed information of the requirements that are compliant with the legislation, so the end user should know exactly which are the characteristics of ebooks, if they have could be navigated, it can be used with assistive technology, if they have image description, and the same for website. The end user should know exactly which are the accessibility requirements of the product and service they access. And as the service should be considered, catalog is included. That means not only the new title, but also probably the backlist. And each actor should be responsible of the accessibility of their part. And sorry. There are some exemptions. In particular, there are exemptions for microenterprises that are organizations that employ fewer than 10 employees and have an annual turnover not exceeding 2 million euros. And they are encouraged to manufacture and distribute product and service in compliance with the legislation, but they are not obliged. Member states should possibly provide guidelines and tools to facilitate them for the application of the directive. The directive should not also be applied if it's possible to demonstrate with detailed documentation that should be provided to the Market Surveillance Authority that accessibility caused a disproportionate burden or a fundamental alteration of the product. And also some special kind of publication like comics, children books, art book should be considered in taking in consideration the applicable accessibility requirement. We know that there are some kind of books that are now, for example, created as fixed layout book. For this book, accessibility is not fully achieved. So for that kind of books, you should create accessible publication at the state of the art of the possible standards that are already in place. What is absolutely not considered as a reason to not be compliant with the legislation is lack of priority, lack of time, and lack of knowledge. And this is why I think one of the most important elements is training, because we do a lot of that as Fondazione LIA, because all the actors in value chain should really understood what accessibility means and should adapt their workflow. And to do this, they need to have people that are skilled on understanding what accessibility means. And as I told, there are market surveillance authority, both at national and European level, who will be responsible for the implementation of the legislation. There are some high-level requirements as described in the European Accessibility Act, and the standard for accessibility in the publishing industry should involve file format, website, reading solution, and hardware solution, distribution founder, metadata creation. We have prepared as Fondazione LIA a very detailed document in collaboration with some person from the French Publishing Association, a detailed document that mapped the compliance of the already existing standard, in particular EPUB, ONIX, and schema.org, with the European accessibility requirements that are already in place in the directive. You can find the information in this link. And I think this is very, very important because it's important to start now and the standards are already available. If you want to get more information, you can sign our newsletter. We will provide update on the legislation and in general what's going on, especially in the standard arena. Thank you very much. I think the floor is yours, Raphael.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Cristina. So pleased to meet you. So thank you very much for your invitation. So I am Raphael Berger, and with my colleague Clara Bedov from Arcom, that we are going to present you in detail a little bit later in the presentation. We will explain the transposition of the European Accessibility Act into the French law and the implementation. In fact, the current step and thoughts we have currently at Arcom about the concrete implementation of this directive and the way we are going to control the accessibility of ebook in the coming years. But firstly, I'll let Clara explain you and detail you the legislative circuit for the transposition of the European Accessibility Act.
So first, it is important to start our presentation with a focus on the legislative steps that has allowed to transpose the European directive into French law. So as you can see, since last autumn, a lot of discussions were held between the Ministry of Culture and Arcom to define the scope and the implementation of the accessibility directive for ebooks and specialized software. And after a lot of parliamentary discussions, the law of February 11th, 2005 about equal rights and opportunities, participation and citizenship for disabled people was amended on last March 9, restoring an Article 48, which incorporates some disposition of the directive. This law is actually being completed by two regulatory texts, a decree and an order, which should be published during the summer. And they will be submitted to the official opinion of the State Council, the National Advisory Council for the Disabled, and the Ministry of Justice. Arcom will also issue an opinion about this text, which will be published at the same time as the decrees, so during this summer. Now that we've seen how far the legislation has come, we're going to focus on how France has transposed the disposition into its national law. So we can resume the transposition of the directive as follows. The basic principles of the directive have been written in the law, while all the contours of this provision are set out in regulatory text. So in the law, at the Article 48 of the 2005 law, it incorporates the two exceptions of the obligation to make ebooks and specialized software natively accessible. As a result, economic operators will not be forced to make ebooks and specialized software natively accessible if compliance would impose a disproportionate burden on the economic operator, or if it would require a significant change of the digital book or specialized software, leading to a fundamental alteration of its basic nature. That is for the law, but as previously said, the Article 48 is supplemented by two regulatory texts, a decree and an order, currently being finalized. So on one side, the decree is really important because it specifies the criteria of the evaluation for the disproportionate burden that will permit an economic operator to escape the natively accessibility obligation. For example, to evaluate the ratio between the cost of compliance and the total cost borne by an economic operator, or another example, estimating the cost and benefits for economic operators in relation to the estimated benefits for disabled people. The decree is also very important because it specifies the penalties to be applied in cases where the economic operator fails to meet its obligations. So there are 5 cases. The first one is to put on the market a digital book or specialized software that does not comply with the accessibility requirements. The second case is failing to provide Arcom with the information and documents requested, then failing to make the information required by law available to the public or failing to keep it. The second to last case is failing to take the necessary corrective measures in the event of non-compliance with accessibility requirements. And the last case is to fail to inform Arcom of the corrective measures taken in the event of non-compliance. In practice, Arcom will be responsible for investigating the cases. Then the cases will be forwarded to the public prosecutor for judgment. And the penalty for non-compliance with this obligation is a 5th class contravention with a maximum fine of 7,500 euros. And of course, the sentences may be made public by Arcom. On the other side, we have an order setting out the accessibility requirements applicable to ebooks and specialized software, which is in fact a copy paste of the requirements laid down by the directive in the first appendix. Raphael, it's your turn.
Thank you, Clara. So now you have understood the war. You have understood the war picture concerning the transposal. The ask this task of monitoring the accessibility of ebooks, so will be carried out by Arcom. So why Arcom? So please let me just a quick overview, 2-3 minutes to present you Arcom and to explain why it's perfectly logical that in fact Arcom do this task. In fact, Arcom has been created on the 1st of January 2022 as a merger of the French broadcasting regulator, the CSA, for the French one should know, established in 1999 on the one hand, and the authority overseeing the dissemination of works and the protection of property rights online, the ADOPI, created in 2009, and ADOPI has a main mission to fight against piracy. So Arcom is the audiovisual and digital communication regulatory authority. So this is an independent administration, an independent regulatory like the CNIL, ARCEP in France, and for example, Arcom is part member of the ERGA, the association, the European Association of the Audiovisual Regulatory. Arcom has 3 main missions as a guarantee to make a guarantee of the freedom of communication and expression in audiovisual and digital spaces. So the first mission, the first task is to oversee the democratic and social responsibilities of audiovisual media and online platforms. The second one, to ensure pluralism in audiovisual news media and the independence of public broadcasting. So the first two missions are more focused on audiovisual. And the third one, that's most interesting for us today, to provide economic balance to the sector and to support creation. So the third mission, to support creation, is quite important because it enables Arcom to act within all sectors and to fight, for example, against online piracy of cultural goods. So this may be films, series, music, so audiovisual content, but not only, and also from now on, ebooks. So Arcom is a regulator that can work in the publishing sector. Arcom has also the task of assessing the technical identification measures deployed by online content sharing service providers like YouTube, Facebook, and others. So I will not present you in detail what is a technical identification measures. Perhaps some of you have already heard about, for example, Content ID, Rights Manager on YouTube, on Facebook. And what is important is that this tool recognizes the works uploaded by users of these services, and Arcom must check, verify, check and control the efficiency of these tools. And this tool should work for all kinds of contents, music, video, and also books, digital ebooks. Oh, sorry, my phone. So with this mission, we also work on the publishing field. And finally, the most important is Arcom is already implementing a mission links with the accessibility of ebooks, as there is in France a handicap exception in the copyright field applied to ebooks. It means that disabled people have the possibility of accessing ebooks adapted through authorized organizations like Association Valentin Louis, for example, for instance, in France, but I know that a lot of people here know them, but there are other ones, of course. So this authorized organizations that will ask publishers, ebooks publishers, to make them accessible. So publishers will put this ebooks on a central database centralized by the French National Library, and then this authorized organization will take the file, the digital file of the ebook to put them in accessible format. And within this framework, Arcom has two missions. On the one hand, to censor any disputes concerning the transmission of printed texts in the form of a digital file. And on the other hand, to issue formal notices to publishers who fail to meet their obligation. So these missions are clearly fall in line with those already carried out by Adobe previously. And for the second one, to issue formal notices to publishers who fail to meet their obligations. We are currently working on it with French National Library, for example. We have met some publishers, and the first bilan, first report of this mission will be released this autumn. So I take 5 minutes to explain all this thing, to tell you that Arcom has already a real and strong experience in the field of accessible publishing world, and we are connected with publishers, and I'm going to explain you more in detail after the presentation of the concrete new missions and powers for the Arcom agents by Clara. It's your turn, Clara.
Yes, that's good. So Arcom, which has already been heavily involved in the issue of ebook accessibility since years, as Raphael said, will have new missions and new power for its agents with the directive. Arcom will have 3 new missions. The first one is Arcom will have to check that ebooks and specialized software comply with accessibility requirements, then to assure the complaints or reports on aspects relating to the non-compliance of ebook and specialized software with accessibility requirements. And the last new mission will be to verify that the economic operator has taken the necessary corrective measures. So during this control of the compliance with accessibility requirements, Arcom will have to take into account the specific characteristic of certain books, like, for example, comic books or manga. And to carry out these missions, the law stipulates that Arcom's agents will be empowered to investigate and record infringements by issuing official reports, and will have fairly extensive powers defined in the French Consumer Code for this purpose. For example, we will be able to collect all documents and informations required to facilitate our work, or exchange information with the European Commission on the other regulatory authorities. And Arcom will also be able to appoint a qualified person to assist the agents in implementing these new powers. And now it's your turn, Raphael.
Thank you, Clara. And now, concretely, what are we going to do? We are currently in this reflection phase to prepare for the actual implementation of the law of control. And of course, it's too early to tell you exactly what Arcom will actually do. We have about more than 1 year ahead to think about it, but no, we are going to get down the practical operational stuff, and for the moment we're starting to list all the questions raised by this new mission. Anyway, we have already some recent experiences of new missions launch. For example, since the beginning of 2022, with the launching of Arcom, we have now a new mission to fight against sports online piracy. We are preparing the future implementation of the DSA. So it's no worry for us to cope with new tasks, new missions. In fact, we like it, we love it. We are very exhausted. Yeah, excited. It's a real lapsus. Exhausted and excited to launch new missions. And so the first question we have to answer is, what does the notion of disproportionate burden mean? This is for us the main thing. For example, during the last yearly steering committee meeting for the development of natively accessible ebooks, coordinated by the French Ministry of Culture. Some representative of the French national publishing syndicate have done a map of the costs involved in making ebooks accessible. So we have noticed, but I'm sure that you all know that, for example, there is no extra cost for a novel, a black book without images, and indeed many of them are already accessible. But on the opposite, an accessible EPUB for example, a cookery book can exceed more than 2,500 euros, and compared with about 500 euros for a regular EPUB that we have noticed from this meeting. So the question here we are going to ask ourselves is not whether the cost of 2,500 euros is high or not, but at what point this cost becomes a disproportionate burden. So to answer the question, we have to take into account, for example, the volume of sales, perhaps the past sales, if it was, for example, a new version of a book, the estimated, the expected sales of the book, the overall cost of the book. Is the adaptation to make it accessible? Is it a marginal additional cost or not? It's the same, for example, for a comic book. Even if it is quite expensive, very expensive, we have understood that to create an accessible comic book, the cost, even if it's 10,000 or whatever the cost is not the same if it's, for example, for the last Asterix that sells about 1 million copies in France, and an independent, more modest, smaller sales comic book in France. You don't have the same economy, the same business model behind. So the question for a cookbook, for all book, is to take into account the fact that the disproportionate burden is relative, it's not an absolute. So what is the minimum amount, the percentage, the ratio at which a charge can be disproportionate? So we have to think about it. And to do that, we will have to, for example, integrate, as I explained briefly, all the economic criteria linked with the books, the manufacturing costs, the sales, the expected profits, for example. And we will do that each time we have a discussion with the publisher concerning the fact that a book is not accessible. Then on what basis will this verification be carried out? As provided by the law and as Clara explained, we will work on the basis of referrals. So the law, the decree explain everything, but the cooperation with the Disabled People Association will be necessary, and we will take the advantage of the coming months between now and May 2025 to meet them. And at the same time, we will also be able to carry out additional preventive checks directly with publishers to understand what each part think about it. And this raises a question of the data collection from publishers. In fact, from a general point of view, according to the National Union of Booksellers and the National Publishing Union, and the figures I've been able to find here or there, there are about 10,000 publishing houses in France that published around 75,000 new books every year. It's quite a huge amount, a huge number. Of course, as Cristina, you explained, there are some exception for all the publishers that are less than 10 people, or that have a turnover less minus inferior to lower than 2 million euros will be excluded. But today, I did not make the, I don't have the figures. How many publishers still we have, and how many books still we have every year concerning just the the bigger publishers that have more than 2 million euros turnover and or 10 people. So it's impossible anyway to check and to control every book. So we're going to think about it. It's possible, for example, to work by sampling a random and a representative sample of publishers, a bit like a tax audit, if you allow me to make this comparison. And this sample, we can carry out random checks to check it and to discuss with the publishers. And how we are actually going to check accessibility. This is, in fact, the operational, the real concrete expectation, because the decree specifies the accessibility, the requirements, for example, the fonts of appropriate size and shape, the space, adjustable space between letters, and so on. But that means that we at Arcom will have to verify this in real. So we are going to do it concretely. And once again, we are fully prepared with it. We are fully comfortable with this kind of concrete control because, for example, at Arcom, we monitor on other missions, on audiovisual regulatory missions. Arcom has to monitor the TV channels' compliance with their broadcasting obligation. In fact, all TV channels in France that have an agreement with Arcom have to respect their quota of film, series, documentaries, broadcasting, and so on. So sometimes we have a lot of questions about the definition, for example, of fiction, of documentaries, and so on and so on. So to be sure that a TV channel, a broadcaster fulfill his obligation, we watch the broadcast, and sometimes we decide, we make we check, we watch all together broadcasting, for example, a documentary, to be sure that it's a documentary, not classified, and not a fiction or a magazine, and so on. So we can do very concrete control. And so we will do the same concerning the accessibility of ebooks. We will buy reading devices and we will test ebooks. To do that, to be sure that we look at the good criteria and we check, we verify the most important criteria, we will meet publishers and the representatives of approval associations to understand exactly what each part consider as an accessible ebook, which kind of criteria must be absolutely is really needed, which one is perhaps a little bit less important, because perhaps everything will not be perfect at the beginning. We do not know, in fact, until now. So what I wanted to say is that Arcom has a long experience in this field of concrete operational control. And at the end, we will need to set up a kind of validation process to establish a case of non-compliance. And here, once again, we also have the experience to do that, for example, in the anti-piracy missions. We have the implementation of the graduated response that's aimed to fighting the peer-to-peer sharing of copyright protected content. And this is a very look-like procedure. The procedure is very similar to the procedure here because we at Arcom have the power to send the most sensitive cases to the public prosecutor, and this is the same case. The offenders are also liable to a fifth category fine. So we can draw inspiration from this to organize the kind of internal process from a publisher, the analysis of an ebook, and then perhaps in some cases, the most important cases, sent a file to the public prosecutor. So Of course, we are just at the beginning of the concrete work, and there are certainly other points that we haven't yet thought of. But as we say, we're making progress as we go along, and we've got sometimes not so much, in fact, a little bit about 1 year ahead of us to put these arrangements in place. So anyway, what I wanted to say is that we are really happy and excited to launch this new mission. Like it's interesting to launch new missions and to strengthen this regulatory brick. And you can be sure that we will do all we can, and you can have full confidence in Arcom to implement it. And of course, we are here to answer a question just now or later, for example, with the EDRLab or other people, of course, to discuss these current operational tasks. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Rafael, Clara, and Cristina, for this useful informations. We have 2 questions. The first one, I mean, both are quite technical, but I'll let you see who want to respond. So the first one is about fixed layout. So Cristina, you mentioned that a publisher should do what he can do to make these files as accessible as possible. The question is, how will a publisher know that he has done enough?
Yes, it's one of the new items to discuss, because it's quite easy to define what an accessible ebooks is in a very many different areas, also for complex layout book like educational books and so on. For comics, it's something that is under discussion and under testing. There is a specific working group in W3C where we are working on defining the requirement of an accessible fixed layout book. There are some elements that are, for example, the semantic element that could be included also in comics, but there are some other elements that may not be so easy to do. So this is why also the legislation say at the state of the art of the possibility. So if you are interested in that, I suggest to follow the activity we are doing. For example, we as Fondazione LIA, but other organizations are testing how to create fixed layout books in an accessible way. There are not now standard rule defined, so it's in progress. So right now, I would suggest to make some pilot project because it's still under discussion. Why do you want? I can ask the second one. I can answer the second one in a more easy way.
And just to mention that tomorrow and after tomorrow, we will have some insights on project and possibilities about fixed layout. But yes, it's not a fixed response now. So the second question is about the European Accessibility Act considers only EPUB format as an ebooks, or does it consider also other formats? That means will a PDF with alt text, bookmarks, etc., be considered that as accessible? And second question in the same question is, does PDF needs to comply with different accessibility standard or with WCAG AA? Your microphone is...
First of all, if you look at the mapping we have done, we have checked that the level of accessibility that is required to comply with the European Accessibility Act is WCAG AA. And for PDF, you can create fully accessible CDF, but they miss one of the requirements that are included in the legislation, that is the reflowable possibility. that is a problem for visually impaired people that are low vision people, because for one blind people is no problem, but for low vision people, not having the possibility to reflow on small screen like a smartphone could be a problem. So you can create fully accessible PDF, but they lack one of the requirements of the law.
Many thanks, Cristina. Clara, Rafael, maybe you want to add something in relation to those two questions?
Well, no, I think it was quite clear from the answer from Cristina, and thank you very much for this very clear and precise answers.
Well, many thanks to the three of you. Many thanks to all our attendees. This is the end of this session. There's still a way to speak and ask questions to our speakers in the lobby chat. And have a nice afternoon.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Bye.
much.
I just added the link of the research project we have done on fixed layout at LIA Foundation. So if you want more information, you may find there.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rafael, if you wish, I would be very interested in understanding how you are going to organize